Hello everyone. Every organization in Australia that's exploring AI right now is asking the same question. If we use AI, are we really compliant with Australian regulations and frameworks? And honestly, this is a fair concern. The executives in the organization or the decision makers are excited about AI, but they are very cautious also. No one wants to be in the headline because their AI chatbot breached the privacy laws or produced the unfair or the biased outcomes. So in this video, I'll walk you through the complete picture of the different AI compliances in Australia. Then I'll show you which compliances are automatically satisfied by the Azure AI. And then we'll look at the different areas you still carry responsibility. And finally, I'll explain how you can close those gaps using Azure AI along with the different Azure services. As well as I'll show you how to stay ahead of the game because the regulation in Australia is moving fast regarding the AI. It is the right time to act now. So I would say let's get started. Before we talk about Azure, let's understand the different regulations and the compliance in Australia regarding AI. So the first one is the AI ethics principle. Second one is voluntary AI safety standard, which is also called as VAISS. Then the National Framework for the AI Assurance in Government, this is for the government sector, and the Privacy Act 1988. Now let's discuss each one of them. So the first one is the AI ethics principle. It was introduced in 2019 and there are 8 voluntary principles, which are human well-being, human-centered values, fairness, privacy and security, reliability and safety, transparency and explainability, contestability, and finally accountability. So these aren't the laws, but they are the best practices which you need to follow to be compliant. So another one is the voluntary AI safety standard, VAISS. So in 2024, government launched the AI safety standard. And this is more than the principles. So it has actually 10 guardrails that tell you how to design and deploy your AI responsibly. So think of it as a best practices checklist, which includes the risk management, human oversight, testing, transparency, and record keeping. Another one is the National Framework for AI Assurance in Government. As I already told you, this is for the government sector, but this came out last year in mid-2024. So it's about the assurance, being able to prove that AI is being used responsibly in the government sector. So there are 5 cornerstones, which are fairness, accountability, privacy, transparency, and safety. And the last one is the Privacy Act 1988. So this is a law that sets strict rules on how the personal data is collected, stored, and used. And it includes the data breach notification requirement, as well as the privacy principles around the consent, disclosure, access, and the security. And on top of these, we can't forget the security compliances like IRAP, which is Information Security Registered Assessors Program, as well as the ISM. So if you're working with the government data, Azure has already been assessed for protected level workloads, which means the platform already meets the higher security standards. So all these what I have explained are the different compliance requirements for AI in Australia right now. So one of the biggest advantages of using the Azure AI is that you don't have to start from scratch or zero, because there are a lot of out-of-box compliances which you get as soon as you start using Azure AI. For example, the content safety. Azure AI comes with the built-in content filters and the abuse monitors. So most of the models are pre-trained and they have the content safety as well as the monitoring enabled. Most of the pre-trained models have content safety enabled. However, in Azure AI Foundry, you get a built-in feature along with that. So that means you don't need to add a third-party tool to block the harmful or the unsafe content. And the privacy commitments. Your prompts and the outputs are not used to train the foundation model in Azure. So it's the commitment by Microsoft that all the prompts as well as the outputs are not used for any training. However, you will not find these commitments for the different AI model providers. So if you have to use any model, use it through Azure AI Foundry and automatically you will get that assurance. Now another one is the data residency. You can deploy in the Azure regions, for example, Australia East or Australia Southeast. However, you need to take care of the deployment type. For example, if you're using the Azure OpenAI models, there is an option of using the global or the data zone models. In case of global, the data will reside in Australia, but processing can happen outside Australia. But if you use the data zone, the processing as well as the data will remain within the Australian boundaries. So you need to take care of those things. So now if we'll talk about the different certification, Azure is IRAP assessed, ISO compliant, SOC compliant. So that means your AI workload run on a platform that is already trusted by the government and different regulated industries. So these are actually the quick wins for you. You get at least 60 to 70% compliant without even doing anything. You are just deploying in Azure AI Foundry and automatically you are compliant. But there is still more work to do. Azure can't take care of your governance. So here are the areas where you remain responsible. And you can close these gaps using the different AI services in Azure as well as the other different Azure services. For example, human oversight, deciding when a human needs to be in the loop. For example, you have an application that uses AI assisted hiring or medical advice, it must have a human reviewer. So how you can use it? You can use the Azure AI agent service with the Logic app where you can define a workflow and the output has to be approved by a human. Let's take an example. AI flags a loan application as a high risk. Then Logic app sends it to the team approval or the Outlook for approval. So this builds the oversight and contestability directly into your whole process of the workflow. Now another one is the observability and monitoring. In Azure AI Foundry, you can enable the observability where you can capture the prompts, outputs and the usage pattern. Now you can push all those logs to the Azure Monitor using the application insight. You can use the Sentinel to detect different anomalies. For example, the unusual number of query spikes. For example, someone is doing the prompt injection or there is a misuse or a security incident. So that can be taken care by Sentinel. So now you, along with the Azure AI services, you have to use the different services too. Another one is the bias and the fairness testing. So you must test your model which you are going to use in your application. And Azure gives you different tools, but you must run them and store the result. For example, in Azure AI Foundry, you have an AI dashboard that runs the fairness and the bias report before the deployment. So you can fine-tune your model based on the compliance and the fairness and store those reports into the Purview Compliance Manager, and that will become the evidence for the audits. You can even use the red teaming where you can stress test your AI based on the different prompts. Now another one is the transparency. Now you need to tell the users that you are interacting with the AI and you must explain the decisions in a very plain language. So the suggestion here is publish the different model cards. So what data the model uses, its intended use, limitations, and enable the logging as well as the monitoring so that you can exactly see how AI decisions are being made, and you have to log all this. And if we'll talk about the risk and assurance, you need a documented risk register where you have to do the periodic reviews and you have to provide evidence in the compliance manager. So when you create a compliance manager assessment, which is mapped to the VAISS guardrails, so you can attach the different bias report, oversight, workflows, sentinel alerts, and risk register entries so that you are ready when there is an auditing. Another one is the security. Even though Azure provides the encryption and IRAP assessed infrastructure, but you need to configure the multi-factor authentication, key vault, private endpoints. That means your data should not go through the public channel, and API protection. All your outbound traffic should be through firewall. Now you also need to wrap all your AI endpoints using the APIM, which is API management. You have to enable the authentication, throttling, rate limiting. So if you are deploying a production application, you should think about the Azure AI landing zone, where the governance and the guardrails are implemented when you deploy the landing zone. And in the landing zone, you have the different Azure policy and the defender which are enforced, and you get compliant against the different standards. You don't have to just think about the compliance, but you need to stay ahead of the game. And my suggestion here is that you should adopt VAISS, which is Voluntary AI Security and Safety. Even though it's voluntary, it has 10 guardrails as your standards. So when the mandatory rules arrives, you are already ready. So you need to document everything. Keep fairness reports, oversight logs, sentinel alerts, model cards. Now red team your AI. There is an option of AI red teaming in Azure AI Foundry where you can regularly test your AI model with prompt injection, bias edging, misuse scenarios, and you have to store those results. And based on the result, it's highly recommended to fine-tune your model which you're going to use. And don't just think about the Australian compliance. There are different compliance which are international. So in case if you're going to use your AI application or you are a multinational company, in that case, you need to think about the international compliance too. So if you'll follow all the voluntary compliances also in Australia, then you will be almost compliant internationally. And this is how you stay ahead in the game, because you have already compliant with the voluntary compliance. And if the government make changes or bring some new laws or different compliance requirement, mandatory requirements, in that case, you will be already compliant. So now let's recap what we have covered in this video. So we started with the problem every organization faces. So how to be sure that their AI is compliant. Then we went through the Australian frameworks, which are AI ethics principle, voluntary AI safety and standards, assurance framework, and the Privacy Act. Then we looked at the quick wins which Azure AI gives you out of the box. And those things are like content filters, privacy commitments, observability, and the different certifications, which Azure is already assessed for. So we then explored the areas where you remain responsible. For example, human oversight, fairness, transparency, contestability, risk registers, and security. And finally, I showed you how to close those gaps using the Azure AI Foundry and the different other Azure services. For example, your Logic app, Azure Monitor, Sentinel, Purview, Key Vault, and the API management, along with Azure Policies and Azure Defender. And then we wrapped up by talking about how to stay ahead of the game by adopting VA ISS now, where you have to document everything, red team your AI, and if you follow all these steps, you will be confident that your application is not only innovative but aligned with the Australian different compliance and regulations. And that's all I wanted to show in this video. I hope you liked it. Please like and subscribe. Thank you so much.